say it?
Guys, I'm so sorry.
You were
no
welcome.
I went to the
Welcome,
wrong
Taylor Lorenz.
I went to the wrong side of the wrong conference center.
That's happened to me like 8 times this week.
Yeah, they actually told me to go over there, but here I am.
We'd rather not.
Do you want us to wear masks or?
No, it's okay. Well, it's fine.
You want to see?
No, it's okay. Sorry, I just got in the hospital like 2 days ago.
We're all putting them on. Let's, at least this close to you, Taylor. I brought it specifically because I have respect for you.
Thank you guys so much for coming at 10 a.m.
We were discussing the Supreme Court decision. We were kickstarting this with a real fun one.
Yeah, the TikTok boys with the hair and the thigh tattoos that follow me were like, man, what do we do? I was like, talk about it. Talk about how you're mad about it. Talk about how you lost the right to casual sex. Like, because that's what they were concerned about. They were like, does this mean, like, what does this mean? I was like, this means you lost something too. Like, if you're feeling grief, it's because you lost something. You lost this option that you would have had previously to not be a father. And they're like, yeah, it does kind of feel like that. I'm like, then that's okay to say that. Like, I think we have to encourage men to definitely join the conversation, especially if they have feelings that this is wrong and this is something that they're feeling lost from as well. Have you gotten any feedback from people so far about it?
Honestly, yeah, I just talked to also a couple TikTok influencers.
Your mic.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I have just spoken to a couple other TikTok influencers because I was interested in misinformation, which I know is something that we're discussing and just like where they're getting their information from. I saw one TikToker posting like, oh, well, just because it's overruled doesn't mean that you can't still get an abortion. Everyone's overreacting. And I was just like, you know, where are you getting that information from?
From the California governor who said that they're still around?
There's also a lot of what I would sort of classify as like positive misinformation or like potentially like helpful misinformation that's not actually like super helpful.
Yeah.
Like I said when the memo first leaked, I remember there was something going around that period tracking apps were going to be like taking your data, like apps like Flow, like menstrual and fertility tracking apps were going to be taking your data, and there wasn't really like any evidence for that. You know, like it's conceivable, and it still is. You know, it could very well happen, but like it wasn't actually grounded in reality. And yesterday, when I found out the decision, like that was primarily what was on my feed, just like that one narrative going viral over and over and over again. And people were trying to be helpful.
I think people want to feel like they can do something,
Yeah.
or feel like they want to be included, and so they want to take some kind of step. I agree. I saw some crazy, like 34,000 retweet thing on my feed yesterday of just ridiculous, kind of like you said, that like positive misinformation almost, and just like directing people to the wrong things. And I think that can be really harmful because like, well, one, like you don't want people, you know, not using services that they maybe relied on, but also because like it takes away from them taking, I think, more meaningful action.
Well, I wonder how misinformed it is. So right after we all like went into our swirl of like, what do you do? How are you going to provide options to people? And I had interviewed this woman-owned company, Sticks, that essentially like they do ovulation, fertility, pregnancy tests, and they have the Restart, which is essentially like a plan B. But they have a period tracker within their information, and they had consulted with their lawyers or whatever, and the lawyer was like, it could potentially.
That was very smart about like, you know, how TikTok sort of promoted that. But I would just see people like regurgitating these ideas or like that had absolutely no basis, like the narrative that Amber Heard was snorting cocaine like on the witness stand. Like she was literally just like wiping her nose. You know, she didn't even look like, only a narc would think that's how you do cocaine. You know, like that you literally like smuggle.
How do you do cocaine, EJ? I don't know.
I'm gonna pull out my straw while I'm 6 months pregnant and my gold-plated mirror and like show you guys
how to do cocaine.
But like I think that was really the catalyzing moment for me when I realized like, oh, you know, we keep talking about how Facebook has a misinformation problem. We keep talking about how boomers have no media literacy and how we need to improve that. But I really think that the next frontier of that conversation is going to be Gen Z.
I totally agree. I think there's, and the death trial, as I wrote, you know, it was so shaped by these warped incentives and these content creators who are very agenda-driven content creators. Like, and again, it's great to get those types of opinionated perspectives on things, but I think, yeah, all of these things kind of are coalescing. For me, the moment that made me be like, oh my God, we're fucked was actually the discourse around Cuties. Do you remember Cuties?
Oh my god, that was so long. That was like mid-2020.
Yeah, but it was like seeing the way the drama channels covered it. I feel like TikTok.
What's a cutie? I don't know.
Oh, okay.
You can explain. Yeah.
You can explain
Is that what it is?
So it was this documentary made by this I think Moroccan director, or
Yeah,
French director. And I saw it wasn't a documentary actually. It was like a fictional movie about like this young girl who joins this dance troupe. And I don't know if you saw the movie, but it's actually an excellent movie. Like it's a commentary on the sexualization of young girls. And how much society pressures them to sort of behave a certain way. But the way that Netflix specifically, because Netflix distributed it, marketed it, was to show the girls like in very skin tight outfits, like showing their butts to the camera. Like it was a very overly sexualized. It was an objectively terrible campaign.
It looked like an ad for toddlers and tiaras.
Yes.
And it was.
Well, I now feel better about not knowing what it was. I feel like I'm on the right side of the internet at least.
But it got warped into this like just brain-broken online discourse saying that it was like supporting pedophilia and like, as EJ mentioned, it was actually this like critique of the sexualization. And but I just remember like D'Angelo Wallace and like all of these like drama channels like just buying into this sort of far-right framing of it and with no critiques. And I think that like we look at drama channels a lot and like most of what they're covering is YouTube drama, right? And like things like that. But then you're starting to see them, and this is what I wrote recently, like applying that sort of same framework that they found success on of like, influencer drama to real news events, and kind of they consistently align themselves with these far-right outrage campaigns. And I think we need to be cognizant of that. And I think TikTok has basically taken the worst aspects of drama channel culture on YouTube and combined it with Twitter, kind of mass commentary, and combined it and brought it to the masses. And I don't know how you feel.
And also with a faux socially justice element, which is almost the worst part of it. Like the boomers on Facebook, have terrible, shitty, garbage opinions, but the Zoomers have like good opinions. They just apply them to the wrong frameworks or like to the wrong issues.
Well, it's all couched, and this is again, like we know this from radicalized, like this is a tactic of radicalized group online is like sort of make these bad faith attacks, exploit people's genuine desire to do something or care, like the Wayfair thing too, right? Like it's like no one wants to come out and say that they like support human trafficking. Of course, no one supports human trafficking, but Wayfair was not human trafficking children, and so I just.
The conspiracy theories that come out, and then like West Ham Caleb, who
which I got canceled for defending, but like I just think like I mean I'm not even defending him. It was more just like we don't have all the information in this situation, and I think these like people want to channel their like rage somewhere, but I think as journalists we need to like obviously we step back and like look for the full story and make sure that we have the full story and make sure that we like. We don't just go dox and harass someone because we saw some viral TikTok about how terrible they are,
Something I've been wondering that I would be really curious to hear your two's opinion about, because you guys both work as representatives for legacy publications as well. I guess I also I mean, technically, I don't know. Yeah, I guess that's true. We talk a lot in the newsroom about like how legacy publications should react to misinformation on social media and whether or not we have an obligation to correct every single piece of misinformation out there. Because at a certain point, like A, it's almost impossible, and B, there's an argument that platforming the misinformation is ostensibly, worse than combating it. Like I remember having that conversation, we did a story recently about whether or not Justin Bieber had a vaccine injury from Ramsay-Hunt syndrome, and how that was circulating and sort of like debunking it. And there was a part of me in the back of my mind that was like, hey, this has reached a certain threshold, like this is a very prominent theory, but are we giving it more oxygen by debunking it? Or is this doing more harm than good, basically? So I would love to hear your guys' opinion on that.
I think we saw that a little bit more with the Lauren Boebert is a former escort who had abortions of Ted Cruz's alleged baby, right? Which was like so outrageous, and I'm sorry guys, it's not true, like that wasn't true. But it was such a good story or trending story because people look at someone like her and they say you vote against the interests of all these things that you benefited from. She didn't, because that story is not true, but within what people thought at that time. And it was like a revenge thing, because there are so many people who feel like they don't have any power, so you have this like, mean high school girl didn't get asked to prom moment, right? Where you're like, yes, we got her, like, and that is just so icky. And so we had discussed, like, should we say something about that because it was so viral? And should we say like that actually didn't happen and like this is like a good way to potentially help educate people on how to read for media bias or like just for like what's real and what's not? And also research who put that out, the American Muckraker PAC, and like who are those guys and what are their motivations? Yeah. And their motivations are fundraising, not truth telling. So like what do we do about that? And we eventually decided no, because commenting on something that is so just outrageously false was like not worth the time because the news cycle would move on more quickly than we could ever put together like a moment that made sense.
I think, yeah, I was gonna say, I mean, I definitely deal with this just with myself, like kind of there's so much sort of fake, I'm sure we've had the same thing, like information about yourself, you don't want that Streisand effect of like, debunking everything. I think that like the idea of platforming things like had more credence maybe 10 years ago when the media had more of a platform, but now things can go so viral that I think it's like, there's just more factors at play, like, and things can just go viral more quickly. I think it's really important, obviously there's like organizations like, Snopes or whatever that will do those like real-time fact checking, but I think it's explaining to people, anytime you're debunking misinformation, why, like the background of that narrative, right? Like, yeah, it's not just, oh, you saw this information about me, it's not true. It's like, but here, let's talk about the groups that are promoting that narrative and why they're doing it. And it just goes back to media literacy, like helping people understand the scope of these.
And with that particular story, there was no way to promote and criticize Lauren Boebert within the context of that story without also shaming sex workers. So you got a whole bunch of social justice folks who are typically identify as liberal, or typically identify as on the side of sex work, being legit work, who were like, kind of pseudo-admitting by purporting this, like pushing this story out, that they maybe did think there was something that she should be ashamed of. And so now we're really, like off of the truth of what it was in favor of just something that will get you views. So
get, content creators coming at you, you're gonna get every kind of bad fake person like attacking you, and a lot of fans that have just watched too much of, one side's videos. So I think that's really hard as well, as kind of like having the fortitude and having a media company that can actually withstand that fortitude, because we know that media companies are so unprepared for these types of campaigns.
You're with a big media company. You face more online harassment and doxxing and stuff than truly like any other journalist on earth. And we all talk about you in every newsroom, I promise. Everyone's like, oh my God, Taylor Lorenz, like, is she gonna be okay? Like, what's going on? How are they protecting her? Can you maybe let people know how that's
Well, we should educate newsrooms about things like GamerGate. Like, I think I was, it's shocking to me at the New York Times, where I worked previously, and the Washington Post even, or anywhere, that there's so many leaders within these legacy newsrooms across the industry that don't even remember GamerGate. I mean, everything I deal with now, I know Anita Sarkeesian and so many women have dealt with for a decade, and so I think it's teaching people in our institutions, political institutions, media institutions, about how to recognize these bad faith campaigns and not make the mistakes. Sometimes it's letting them make the mistakes, definitely sometimes you just have to be like, hey, look, if you do this, it's going to be really bad. And they do it, and they realize it's really bad, and it's like, well, now you can listen to me next time,
Do you ever regret something? Like, do you regret covering Libs and TikTok?
No, absolutely not.
Do you regret, like, any of the things that
No, I don't give a shit. No, and they dox me all day. They do dox me. No.
Good.
But also, I have so much privilege to be able to do that. Like, I've dealt with so much with my family, and my parents have been swatted multiple times recently. It's just been the stuff the way that what they've done to my family has been really, really bad, and it's really hard to protect them. So, but I luckily come from like a generic like middle class white family, and a very close friend of mine who I worked with at the Times, like her parents are immigrants and couldn't deal with the police constantly. The police come to my parents' house all the time, and my mom's like, oh hello, we've got donuts or whatever. Like,
Hear about Taylor again? Okay.
yeah, and you know, that's not the case. Or if my parents didn't live in like a, you know, generic neighborhood. So I think, I don't know. I'm sure you know, I don't have children, and I can't imagine like what it's like, because I know you deal with it too, EJ. Like,
Not even nearly to the same degree. Like it's like probably like enough thousands of the shit that you deal with. But yeah, I mean, it's not fun. I mean, this morning I had to email security for like the 10th time in the past month because I had seen a meme of my face circulating on Reddit with like a noose around it and the caption like "kill all feminists," and I kept reporting it and it just kept like being copy pasted like everywhere. And I've had people, you know, like commenting, and honestly this has been worse among like less among white supremacists and more among like you know, 19, 20-year-olds like commenting on my dead grandma's photo on Instagram or like saying horrible things about my son. Like, I mean, it's not fun. It's not fun, but you really do. I mean, I hosted this panel, I moderated this panel yesterday on cyberbullying and harassment on the internet. And I asked the creators, like, does it get better? Do you get more inured to it? And they all said uniformly, like, yes, you do, like, for better or for worse. Like, we know about all the systemic issues that are contributing to this. Like, we know that the platforms bear a lot of responsibility and are really dropping the ball. But, like, honestly, the thing that has made this easier is just the more that you do this, the more immune you become to it. And, like, do I think it's a good sign of the culture we're heading in? And that, like, you know, I can see the death threat like circulating on Reddit and think like, oh, whatever, you know.
No, but death threats to me are like so nothing. Like, death threats, it's not, but you know what I mean? I feel like you just get so many all day, every day. Like, to me, the harm, I mean, and they're harmful, they're terrible. I'm not saying that they're nothing to other people. I'm just saying, like, me personally, I've been completely, like, I'm more frustrated by the smear campaigns. Like, I think
Yeah, I understand that.
there's much more harm long term with these like campaigns, and it's like, okay, the death threats are basically a result of these campaigns, and I don't know, like, to me that's more harmful, and I'm like, I don't give a shit if you tell me all day to die. It's these narratives, and I want people to understand these groups and how they operate instead of like just being like, oh, don't tell Taylor to kill, you know, whatever. I don't know if you guys.
I absolutely do not get death threats. My heart is racing out of my chest right now. I'm like, maybe Under the Desk News is going to be like a sports channel next or something. No, I don't. And I think it's because I have created this little space that is like I am actually scared. That's why I got under my desk. And we don't go as far as you guys go with different things. It's not about like telling a full entire story.
This is all obviously GamerGate 101. And I think I am the most prominent person exposing a lot of the dynamics on the internet. I frankly don't know anyone else who has done a lot of the stories that I've done in sort of the way that I've done them. Like, I think, like, you know, people, I mean, yeah, people just, there's so many reasons. I think also, obviously, I'm a woman. There's things about me. Like, I definitely like to troll a little bit and fuck with people. I tweeted I had to eat, like, I was so hungry this morning. I woke up at like 8 a.m. and the only thing I had to eat was this like can of soup, and I was like, fuck it, I'm gonna eat this soup for breakfast. And I was like, this is so funny. I'm gonna tweet it, and like people are gonna, it's gonna make people mad, and they're gonna be like,
Why would that make people mad?
oh, they were like dunking on me.
Taylor Lorenz eats soup with my family. Like, that's definitely, she's a terrorist. She's
And like, you know, I keep my apartment very hot. Like, I am meant to live, I swear to God, in like the tropics, and I'm always like, I love my like 90-degree thermostat, just because it's like, I don't know, I need some kind of entertainment online, and these people are so like have no self-awareness, so it's fun to like kind of joke around and kind of like troll a little bit, but yeah, I mean, I think that, like, you know, I don't think there's anything unique other than I do politically adjacent stories, and I think a lot of when I first got on these people's radar was Charlottesville, and that it's like they kind of find people, and then as my career has grown, I think they get more and more angry. I mean, they're like, yeah, the conspiracy now is that I was secretly demoted, and I was actually promoted to a better team to hide that I was secretly demoted. It's like, it's just, it's like QAnon stuff. It's like, yeah, Biden is actually dead, but they're allowing Biden to be president because Trump's really gonna be president. It's just like,
There was a conspiracy theory that I died.
That you died?
Yes. There's a conspiracy theory that I died because my name was in the Washington Post crossword, and I guess it's unusual for like live people to have their name in the crossword. And there was a whole thing about how if I was dead or not. And people were like, well, they posted like 15 minutes ago. I was like, y'all, come on, you gotta do a little better than that.
Well, you have an opportunity to refute it now. Are you dead?
I'm inside, like, but there are, you are the first. Let's brag on Taylor Lorenz for a minute.
Wait,
You are the
that's
first.
not the Taylor Lorenz panel.
No, but I want to talk about, like, I have a transition, I promise. When you did Libs of TikTok, that was something that folks were like, why do that? Why give platform to that? Like, that was so dangerous. Those people are crazy. Are you really going to teach them anything? And then it became such a thing. And then I was listening to Robert Evans, who is another journalist that I really respect and love. And I think he covers a lot of stuff that's very controversial. He's extremely political. He's not afraid of stuff. And he had said on Behind the Bastards, or It Could Happen Here, I can't remember which one, we weren't going to cover Libs of TikTok, but after Taylor's coverage, I think it's worth going into. And I thought that was just like cool. I don't know. I thought that was cool that there is this like making it okay for people to step into spaces that we have been shamed out of being in and expose some of these terrible things that are happening in far right media.
I think we need to talk. I think we need to educate, and EJ covers this stuff too. And you know, but it's like you have to educate people about this media ecosystem. Like I consider myself just as much a media reporter as a tech reporter, because I think media reporters focus on this dying industry that doesn't affect people. And I think when I think of Libs of TikTok, like what I had noticed is an emergent media company, one that with very powerful backers and that was growing and had a real market effect on the world. I mean, it was being mentioned in sort of by DeSantis' press secretary in relation to the Don't Say Gay bill, was being platformed by really big people and had led to meaningful real world harm. So I spoke to many people who had been doxxed, fired, had to move from their town after being exposed by that account, which was growing exponentially. So I felt like obviously I'm covered. I mean, once again, it's kind of explaining these influencers and how this specific influencer was basically like the assigning editor for Fox News.
Right.
And I think we need to explain the way that these mechanics work because people don't understand our media climate right now. They don't. And media reporters are busy, tweeting about who's taking over Warner Brothers or something, which is really important business information, I'm sure, but we need more people focused on exposing these things. I mean, I think what you've done, EJ, in terms of building, also like speaking of pioneering a beat, like just everything that you've done to kind of educate people about sex work and sex workers on the internet and kind of all of that stuff, like I've learned so much, and I think that's like another example of me being like, where else would I find this reporting? Because I think like you just so often, if you're not plugged in, like you don't realize these things happening. Like you're like, wow, that's absolutely insane. These people are being exploited in these ways, or this bad stuff is happening.
The legal system and having absolutely zero credentials to do so. And I think that's a really big problem. And I think it's a problem that those people are calling them, because journalists are trained to do a very specific thing. Like journalists are not infallible. Journalists are not perfect. A lot of journalists do come in, with some, because we're human, like with some semblance of bias and with some semblance of an agenda. But I still do think that for all of the problems of journalism and all of the problems of legacy media, that the average legacy media publication is going to be a lot more reliable and a lot more authoritative than the average person on TikTok with 500,000 views saying, here's why Amber Heard was snorting cocaine on the witness stand. Mm-hmm. And I think it's a really big problem that trust in these publications has eroded. And it's not entirely like legacy publications do play a role in this, like they do assume some responsibility for this, but I have seen the trust erode in mainstream journalism so much, even within the past 2 years. Like basically since COVID, just constant DMs, people in my notifications, calling me a hacker, saying, that, just a lot of hatred toward journalists. And I think that's a really big problem, and I think that we're pivoting to a model where journalists are just going to have less and less public faith in them, and creators who do not have training are going to have more and more, and I do think that's going to be an issue.
Yeah, I think it is an issue. I mean, definitely I covered the 2016 election, and I just remember those sort of beginnings of seeing a lot of these things like bubble up. I will say one thing that bothers me about the whole like pivot to the creator economy or whatever, and I'm an optimist, like I think, and Wes Lowery has actually talked about this the most eloquently, of sort of like just the deep failures of the legacy media system and sort of the traditional systems or the traditional entertainment system, right? Like it is good that those old power structures are being disrupted by this theoretically more inclusive system, and can be a more inclusive system. I think the right has been really effective at kind of co-opting that language and making it seem like, oh, well, the move to the creator economy is actually because we hate the media because XYZ. No, I mean, these are big technological shifts, and actually it's affecting everyone across the political spectrum, and you don't own that shift at all, just, you know? And so I think that we need to kind of like have more people with a deeper understanding operate in these spaces and build audiences. And I agree, it's scary kind of the way that people are so misinformed about what journalism is and how it works and all of that, and you see that in these campaigns. But
isn't that kind of on us though? Isn't that kind of on journalists to say like, to that point, people don't feel included, and they don't know essentially the mechanics of a Columbia University journalism degree and all that great education that people have gotten, but they want to have a piece of it. Is there some level of, like, yeah, we do news content online and we're talking about stuff, is there some sort of effort that could be taken to help people feel included in that, so we could build an army of 1A evangelists the way that 2A has it, or abortion, anti-abortion people were?
Well, I think that's on legacy institutions. I mean, hello, like stop falling for bad faith attacks. Like literally, just do the basic. And again, Wes Lowery, I think, has talked really, really well about this, and kind of like, if we want trust, we have to, you know, we have to kind of, respect people and respect these criticisms and these misunderstandings, and respect and take acknowledgement of the failures over the years to cover, you know, marginalized groups well, or kind of.
Because we're still just diversifying the newsrooms, never mind like having that authentic perspective to bring it online. So people went outside of that because they couldn't get a job at the paper and created their whole own Reddits or TikToks or whatever the case may be. Like, are we too far gone for legacy media to like pull it back in and create more opportunity, or is it like?
I mean, I think Rolling Stone does a good job of like, they don't seem to buy into bad stuff as much, or like, I don't know.
It's very important, but I thought Pizzagate was supposed to be something that made institutional journalism feel like they had to be more responsive to these conspiracy theories. So I'm surprised to hear that you're like, we're still questioning whether or not we should be engaging in that. Is there a responsibility that you feel because of what has happened in that past, or do you think there's somewhere better to get the information?
I'm not quite, I don't know how you guys feel. I definitely would never question that we should cover misinformation, ever. Like, that's a really valuable beat. People like Ben Collins, Brandy Zadrozny, absolutely. Like, the people, that is a really essential beat. I think I mentioned GamerGate because it was networked harassment for a very specific agenda against specific people, and I think that, like, people don't realize how those campaigns work. People just see Taylor Lorenz is trending again. Oh, she's so controversial. Or Amber Heard. Oh, like I saw some videos about that, right? Like, and so I think like GamerGate to me was just far more important in terms of showing the scope of like how the internet can be weaponized and how vulnerabilities in these media institutions' vulnerabilities can be exploited. So that to me was like, but obviously Pizzagate was such a seminal moment, I think, for misinformation, and taught, if a lot of more misinformation focused journalists were up here, I'm sure they would sort of say that would be like a really important moment.
I just was curious, Taylor. This is all about misinformation, right? And then with so much coming out and so many editor critiques and changes to some of your work lately with people like Rekeita and Umbrella Guy and Legal Bites, who 2 of the 3 are lawyers, right? And they were covering that trial. How can we take what you're telling us about misinformation seriously?
That's a really good question. So I think what you're bringing up is actually a misinformation campaign. So what happened recently is an editor put this like boilerplate line in my story saying like, oh, we reach out to these 2 people for comment. We actually absolutely like, it was just like an erroneous line that he added. I flagged it immediately, it gets, taken down. But instead of the news organization kind of recognizing, oh, this is just this bad faith campaign over nothing line. By the way, we did reach out to them for comment immediately after the story. They were both basically like, fuck off. She's like, oh, all that should have happened is a simple line saying, oh, previous version said we should reach out for comment. We've since reached out to them, they've declined, right? That's all you need to say. However, I think what happened is you saw these types of campaigns really effectively exploit our newsrooms. And they kind of kept pushing and harassing our editors, and we're flooded with thousands of emails and threats and horrible things. My family's doxxed, I'm doxxed. All of this stuff happens, they make it trending, they make it controversy, and then you see the editors scrambling, oh my gosh, do we need to put more? What do we need to do? What do we need to do? And it becomes this whole bad faith sort of outrage cycle. And I think that people's misunderstanding and kind of the recognition of, hey, Umbrella Guy, I'm sure you know who this guy is, he was heavily involved in other sort of movements to attack women in these ways. And so I think we need to be really aware of how these things operate, and that our media organizations need to not freak out and react and try and kind of quell the mob. Just say, hey, wow, this is a mob, this is not engaged in anything. Certainly there was no corrections to that fundamental, and nothing in that story was we spoke to influencers with millions of followers, right? They were like, there's no fundamental issue in the story other than an editor added this erroneous line that was immediately fixed. But you see, right? I mean, EJ, I think you saw it as well, just sort of how these things can, people can be so misinformed.
I think the editors oftentimes prioritize de-escalating audience reaction over protecting the journalist. And it's happened to me, it's happened to you, and they do goofy stuff, man. I mean, your thing wasn't goofy, but what happened with me in LA Times was goofy as hell. And you didn't see it because it was on a much smaller level, but my editor, somebody was called me an influencer who just reads headlines. I tweeted about it. They were like, you're harassing me. I was like, I never named you. It went on this whole entire thing. My editor jumped in to be like, we stand by V. They're doing a real journalism. She wrote back and said I hope this doesn't burn a bridge for me at LA Times. And my editor wrote back, no, you do such great work. We're so proud of you. And I was like, Samantha, you have just empowered the woman who was bullying me.
See, here's the problem.
But it's silly sometimes.
Yeah.
And sometimes, but it's always an editor trying to de-escalate or prioritize an audience reaction because that's more normal to them. It's like getting a letter to the editor or something.
I think I wrote a good Twitter thread on this, if I do say so myself, with the help of our PR team.
Yeah.
But just, we need to recognize bad faith attacks when they're happening, and we need to recognize network harassment, and we need to sort of talk about that stuff. And I think most people don't have to what? I don't have time to understand the back and forth, right? I don't understand why is Taylor Lorenz controversial, right? Or why are people coming for V? I guess she's problematic. That's the takeaway. And so I think this is why we need to educate people about the media ecosystem and the creator economy, for a better word, so that we can say people can see those things and they can say, oh, this is just bad faith bullshit, right?
But everything is content. So for that person who had a tiny little dig on me or whatever, it became 16 videos for her.
Yeah,
right, of course, and that's their incentive.
And I also want to say, in your defense, a lot of the issues that were at stake with that particular campaign were just mundane newsroom stuff that honestly happens all the time. Minor miscommunications with editors, with them adding a line and you're not aware of it. That happens all the time. And people not responding for comment or and you didn't even, my understanding was that piece wasn't even about those two people.
No, it wasn't that.
It was a parenthetical.
They
had no obligation to even
no,
reach out. Yeah, but you did, and you corrected it, and then that's minor bureaucratic nonsense that does not actually affect the crux of the story, and it happens all the time. And so what was frustrating for me as somebody who works in your industry and knows that and knows the internal workings of newsrooms is oh, this is clearly being weaponized as a bad faith campaign against somebody who is getting a lot of attention on social media. even though this is like the most boring shit in the world.
And I'm sure that someone's like recording this talk and gonna put it online and take, you know, has already tweeted 10 out of context quotes. Like that.
I don't think so. I trust y'all.
No, but that's fine. I mean, that is the content ecosystem. That is what we're talking about. That's what we have to educate people about.
Yeah.
So anyway, I think
Maybe last question and then we
we're out of time. I know we're
Okay.
over.
Instagram, and there was obviously a huge echo chamber of infographics, and I didn't post anything. I felt really cynical about the virtue signaling of it all, and I had friends commenting like, you know, what's your stance on this? Why didn't you post? You know, you got to make it known. So what do you think is the average person's responsibility to make their stances on these things known, especially because it doesn't feel that important to just post these things over and over?
Let me give you the advice my grandmother gave me. Are you ready? You don't know these people's shit, okay? That's the end. That's the end. So if you feel like you have something to say it. If not, you don't know these people's shit, you know? But we are out of time, so we're good.
Yes, thank you guys so much. We'll be around
Thank
anytime.
you.
That's what we call a panic response.